Are the Rangers back? The Rangers might be back. We tell you why, and we also celebrate the latest overtime thriller.
You're Locked on the New York Rangers, your daily podcast on the New York Rangers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, Blue Shirts fans, to episode number 1415 of the Locked On New York Rangers podcast. I'm your host, John Chick. Just want to thank you guys, as always, for making Locked On New York Rangers your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. And today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off of your first purchase. And we are, of course, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So in true Ranger fashion, they lose game one of a 4-game road trip in Calgary against the Flames, who had lost 7 in a row. The Rangers basically get run out of the building. And then quite naturally, they rally to win the next 3 games to close out the road trip at 3-1. And that also included, of course, these final 2 games, both being won in overtime by the New York Rangers. But what was awesome about this win for me is that it's another example of a player on the Rangers for whom we had high expectations coming into the season and was struggling to meet those expectations early in the season. It's another example of said player coming through in a big spot. We saw it from JT Miller in the game before this. Honestly, we saw it from JT Miller in this game as well, because he, of course, obviously ended up with the primary assist on Will Cuyle's winner. But this was awesome. You know, you had JT Miller, Will Cuylle, and Adam Fox out there to start the overtime period. They weren't able to obviously get the winner at that point, but they eventually got back on. You got JT Miller going up the left side, and he sends a centering pass back to Will Cuylle. Cuylle buries it. And what was interesting about this to me is the move that Miller made here, where he kind of like goes through the neutral zone kind of slow, and then he hits the Jets. It's the exact same move that he used the game before this to win in Edmonton. Of course, the only difference there was Miller went all the way to the net against Edmonton and buried his shot from point-blank range and won the game himself. But also in this game, we saw him try this move earlier in the overtime. He was out there with Lafreniere and got the pass, and unfortunately, you know, they weren't able to convert that scoring opportunity. But now he's out there with Will Cuylle. He makes a perfect pass to him, and Will Cuylle takes care of the rest. And the Rangers won a game that they absolutely 100% deserve to win. I'm going to elaborate on exactly why in just a little bit here. But again, the awesome part about this for me is that it is another very recent example of a player on this Ranger team who you're counting on for big things heading into the season. And, you know, for a while there, you weren't getting them. All of a sudden now, these guys are starting to play like the back of their hockey cards, at least to a certain extent. Certain players to start the year, namely the guys in the top 6, they just weren't cutting it. You know, scoring chances were there, but obviously a lack of finish was hurting this team quite a bit. Some of these guys still have not played, you know, their best hockey of the season. I'm talking about guys like obviously Will Cuylle and JT Miller, who we're talking about here. Also Artemi Panarin, Alexis Lafreniere. You know, ironically, the one guy in the top 6 for the Rangers that I felt like kind of hit the ground running this year was everybody's favorite target from last season, and that would, of course, be Mika Zibanejad. You know, he kind of brought it right at the beginning of the season, but these guys are starting to find it a little bit. I think everybody I just mentioned there has played a little bit better, at least a little bit better, in the last handful of games than what we were seeing before that. And again, in these last 2 games alone, JT Miller, you know, scuffling a little bit at the start of the season. There was some conjecture about maybe he's playing injured. Obviously, he was dealing with some sort of an ailment during most of the preseason, only played in the one preseason game by his own admission. You know, he was scuffling at times this season, and I think he got a confidence boost from the overtime winner that he scored against Edmonton. And then here he is again, one game after he got his first big, you know, Ranger captain moment against the Edmonton Oilers. Here he is, driving play in the overtime, playing to win the game, drawing a couple defenders toward him, and setting it up for Will Cuylle to get the game winner. So that was awesome to see from JT Miller. And as for Cuylle, you know, earlier this season, I believe it was after the 9th game that the Rangers had played, I sent out a tweet like, you know, I know that Will Cuylle built up some goodwill with us last season. He's still playing, you know, a straight line, hard-nosed style of hockey. But at that point, I was wondering, man, has anybody seen Will Cuylle this season? Because 9 games into the season, Cuylle had all of 1 goal and 0 assists. Well, he has changed that in recent games. The last 4 games combined, he's up to 1 goal, this one here in overtime, and 4 assists. And he's got at least 1 point in 4 consecutive games. So that's obviously awesome to see. And look, points aren't everything, and I understand that. But sooner or later, you got to be able to put the puck in the net. And that's something that was absolutely killing the Rangers for a good chunk of, the opening portion to this season. Just unable to finish scoring opportunities. Maybe in some games, unable to even create scoring chances. The power play has been kind of a mess. We know about that. We'll talk in greater detail about the power play for the Rangers in a future episode. But for right now, you just got to appreciate the fact that a couple of guys that were, much maligned to start this season, JT Miller, Will Cuylle, back-to-back overtime winners for both these guys to cap off, what turns out to be a very successful road trip for this Ranger team. I mentioned a minute ago, the Rangers largely dominated this game. So obviously you want the 2 points. I think a lot of us for sure were having some flashbacks to earlier this season, games where the Rangers very clearly outplayed their opponents and did not get the result. The two that really, spring to mind for me at least are the first game against the Oilers, and then also the 1-0 loss to the Washington Capitals. Those were 2 really good examples, and you certainly didn't want that to happen again here. You want to close out the road trip on a positive note, and the Rangers made sure that they did exactly that. I'm going to share a stat later in today's episode that really illustrates just how much the Rangers basically controlled this game from start to finish. The only aspect of this game in which they were not in complete control was obviously the scoreboard. But be that as it may, obviously, they ended up getting the win, getting the 2 points. Look, just a great win. Great way to finish a road trip. Only the Rangers, like I said, could have a road trip like this, where you get embarrassed by the Flames and then you win 3 in a row, including a couple of overtime theatrics at the very end. But look, bottom line, however they got here is how they got there. 3-1 on a road trip is 3-1 on a road trip. I think you got to sign up for that for really any road trip, any 4-game road trip that your team plays throughout the course of an NHL season. This league is very competitive. It's tough to win on the road. Although with the Rangers right now, maybe it's not so tough to win on the road. It seems to be a heck of a lot harder to win at home than on the road. But we're going to keep an eye on that going forward as well. That could be another segment. This, as far as why the Rangers are playing so well on the road and not winning at all at home, I mean, there could be some tangible reasons for it. It could be kind of a mental thing. Maybe you're just trying a little bit too hard at home and you're trying to, win yourself back into the good graces of the fans. And maybe on the road, you're kind of galvanized because you get that whole us against the world kind of mentality. It's difficult to say for sure, but we are going to keep an eye on that going forward. And if it continues like this, if this trend continues, then certainly it's just going to be that much more under a microscope the rest of the season. But again, fantastic ending of the road trip. Hell of a job here by JT Miller, Will Cuylle linking up for the overtime winner and getting the Rangers a win in a game that they 100% absolutely deserved to win. So in just a second, we're going to keep everything rolling. We're going to shift our attention to Noah Laba. He scored a goal in this game, and he continues to impress a lot of Ranger fans, myself included, with his very steady play early in his rookie season. So we'll get to that in just a second. And we're also going to talk about what was a historically awesome defensive performance by this Ranger team against the Kraken. We're going to get to all that good stuff in just a second. All right, we just want to take a minute to let everybody know that today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by FanDuel. The NBA is back, and there's no better place to get in on the action than FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Even if you missed the start of the game or you want to ride a hot hand, FanDuel has live bets on everything from who will score next to fourth quarter comebacks. Plus, you can even combine your live bets to do a same-game parlay for a shot at a bigger payout. It keeps every game exciting, especially when your team is making that late push. Right now, FanDuel is giving new customers $300 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. So head to FanDuel.com to sign up and play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, let's go keep everything rolling here on Locked On New York Rangers. Huge shout out to the everydayers. As always, thank you guys so much for sticking with this podcast through thick and thin and all the ups and downs of New York Ranger hockey. In our next episode, we had some breaking news a little bit earlier today. Going to talk about this in much more detail in the next episode. Brennan Othmann has been sent down to the AHL. He was called up, played in 1 game, was a healthy scratch for 3 games, and now heads back to the Hartford Wolfpack. Got to have some thoughts on Othmann and what the future may or may not hold for him. Will he be traded? What's going to happen there? We'll get to that in tomorrow's episode. And also, Yaroslav Smolash was called up from the Hartford Wolfpack, and we're going to talk about him and what he's done so far this season, and if and when he could actually make his NHL debut, because if he gets into his game, that will indeed be his NHL debut. But for right now, let's talk about another young New York Ranger forward, and that would, of course, be Noah Laba. I came to the conclusion of watching this game, particularly after he scored, but really it wasn't just the goal. I mean, it was really how he played throughout the entire night, and frankly, how he's played ever since this season has started. He's mostly been very, very solid, very steady for the New York Rangers. But the conclusion that I came to is that this kid is a New York Ranger to stay. He is here for good. He might never play another AHL game. You guys know the story, but it's worth a quick recap here before I kind of lay out my reasons why I think he's about to become, a mainstay of Ranger hockey. Basically just forced his way onto the team. You look at the preseason, the rookie series against the Flyers, he was a standout in all of those games. And there was some buzz around Noah Laba. He's a prospect that I think was kind of, creeping up some top 10 Ranger prospect lists. And certainly the fans who really keep an eye on this team and follow them closely. I know a lot of you guys were big on Laba as well. And, keeping track of him coming into, the preseason, the rookie series and whatnot. But, the door, if it was cracked, he kicked it the rest of the way down and basically forced the Rangers to roster him at the NHL level to start the season. But what's interesting to me is this can happen, right? We've seen this in the past. A certain player on the New York Rangers will exceed expectations at training camp and force their way onto the NHL roster. Obviously, Laba is the most recent example. We saw it from K'Andre Miller a handful of seasons ago. We saw it from, Will Cuylle. He had that cup of coffee the one season, right? He was called up for like 3 games, I think it was, but he was never going to stick with the Rangers that year. But the following year in training camp, it was the same deal. He obviously played very, very well and forced his way onto the Ranger roster. Even last year, Victor Mancini wasn't here for very long, and there was an injury that opened up the door for him to make the Ranger team out of training camp. But the bottom line, he forced his way on. This can happen, but what's interesting to me, once you've made the team, it's kind of like, okay, now what? Because at that point, it can really go either way. We can see a young player such as Noah Laba hit the ground running, look like he belongs right away, exceed expectations, force his way up the lineup as Noah Laba has, and never look back and never play another AHL game. Or you can have a situation where somebody makes the team in a similar spot like this, and, the regular season starts, and now you're up against, the best players against every opposing team rather than, rookies who aren't going to make the team or veteran journeymen or anything like that. You're going up against the best players, and they're going full bore now because it's the regular season. So it really can go either way, but I'm glad for Noah Laba that, this is somebody that, again, has looked like he's belonged right from the start. And there's been some similarities tossed around. I've done it. Some of you have done it as well, I believe, between Noah Laba and Will Cuylle when Cuylle was a rookie. I mentioned Cuylle just a second ago. The style of hockey that they play is similar, and we'll get to that in just a second. But I'm not even talking about that right now. I'm just talking about the path they journeyed to get here. I mentioned a second ago that both of them made the Ranger team out of training camp against all odds. I would say probably Cuylle making the team was a little bit less of a surprise that season than Laba making it this season was, but it was still less than 50-50, if I remember correctly, going into that season. And, they forced their way onto the roster, and that's awesome to see. We've now gotten to the point, though, where with Noah Laba, it feels like, again, he might never play another AHL game, despite the fact that he's only played 11 AHL games in his career. And I can remember during Will Cuylle's first season, his first full season with the Rangers, his rookie season, I remember having the exact same feeling right around this time of the season. Once we were getting to 10, 15 games into the season, it was like, yeah, you know what, man, this kid might be the real deal. He's not a superstar yet or anything like that, but he looks like he belongs. And as far as the similarities in style of play, you can point to those as well. As far as Cuylle and Laba, just never look overwhelmed. They're both defensively responsible. They both play that straight line hockey. They're both very physical, just very steady, consistent players. They're guys that you just pencil into the lineup and you don't really worry about them all that much. Now, the one difference here that Laba has in his favor is, again, against all odds. Not only did he make the team, he only took about, the 13th game of the season. And really, it started in the last game, so you can say the 12th game of the season, to work his way into a top 6 role. That's tremendously impressive. Now, there is some extenuating circumstances as far as how and why Laba's in the top 6 right now. The Rangers need to shake up their lineup a little bit. They wanted to put JT Miller, Mika Zibanejad back together. I was all in favor of that move. And even though that line isn't scoring, I do think it looks dangerous when they're out there, far more often than not. You've also got the fact that Vincent Trocheck is injured right now, so that opens up a little bit of a spot for Noah Laba. But either way, he has taken the bull by the horns, and he has forced his way up the lineup, and it's been really, really cool to see. You're going to need some contributions from certain players that maybe the expectations weren't that high coming into the season. If you want to exceed expectations as a team, if you want to get into the playoffs, if you want to make any sort of noise once you're there, you need somebody to step up. You need some production from an unexpected source or two. Now, the other thing I got to point out here, as far as Laba is concerned, all this kind of begs the question of what exactly happens once Vincent Trocheck is healthy and ready to step back into the lineup. Because as of this game against Seattle, Trocheck was eligible to return from LTIR. Obviously, he did not do so. And the Rangers are going to be back in action on Tuesday at home against the Canes. I mean, that could be the night. Haven't seen anything definitive one way or the other as of this recording. But once Trocheck comes back, like, what do? Do you just put Trocheck on the second line and bump Noah Laba back down? Or do you kind of ride the hot hand right now? Do you stick with what's working? Because the Rangers have won 3 games in a row. They've looked good doing it. They've won, in dramatic fashion for a couple of games in a row here now. So do you just stick with those line combinations and do you put Trocheck on the third line and you have him out there between Radish and Sheary? I believe that's probably what you'd be looking at for the third line. I almost lean toward the latter, and that's not a knock on Trocheck. I can't wait to get him back in this lineup. Because even with the recent stretch of good play from this team, the heroic wins, the thing I worry about with this Ranger team right now more than anything else is the scoring or lack thereof and the lack of depth scoring. So Trocheck coming back, that sounds awesome. It's another threat for this Ranger team. Maybe he can even spark the power play. Something's got to get that power play going sooner or later. But having him back is just another threat on the ice for this team. But now all of a sudden, like, this team doesn't look like it's hurting so bad on depth. I mean, you get Trocheck back, and Radish, he still leads this team in goals against all odds. So all of a sudden, your top 9, it's like, yeah, it doesn't look that bad. Laba's emerging a little bit. We've got guys like JT Miller, who's starting to play a little bit better. Just mentioned Will Cuylle a second ago. All of a sudden, this depth that was such a concern, and I still do think it's something of a concern, but all of a sudden it doesn't look quite as bad as maybe it did even a handful of games ago when the Rangers were losing to Calgary in embarrassing fashion. So you could make a case either way there, but we do have to talk about this goal that Laba scored in this game. This is a thing of beauty, and Laba earned this goal long before he ever took the shot because he set the whole thing up. To begin with, you've got a face-off in the Ranger zone, and the Laba line is on the ice. Eventually, the puck is in the neutral zone. You get a really good breakup by Noah Laba. Basically just steals the puck. He dishes up to Alexis Lafreniere. Lafreniere passes to his left to Cuylle. Cuylle takes a shot that is saved. The rebound is knocked home by Noah Laba. And, Laba on this play, after he got rid of the puck, after he got to Lafreniere, beeline right to the front of the net. And you talk about north-south hockey, you talk about wanting to play straight line hockey and FU hockey and all that stuff. That's a great example of it right there. That's a kid that is absolutely fearless, and he's going to go to the high danger scoring areas, and he gets rewarded for it here. Dave Maloney was talking about on the broadcast, when you do things like this, good things tend to happen. And, Laba obviously was rewarded for making a heck of a play here in the neutral zone, getting it to Lafreniere, and again, going right to the front of the Kraken net. So that's obviously awesome to see, and just cannot say enough about the job that Noah Laba has done. There's been a lot of Chris Drury talk recently, and we just launched this kind of mini series that we're doing here on Locked On New York Rangers the other day, where we take a look at Chris Drury and all of his different things that he's done as Ranger GM. The first episode is actually going to be dropping a little bit later this week, but between trades and contract extensions and whatnot, we're taking a look at his draft classes. Right now, it's hard to say for sure with Drury's draft classes because we haven't seen a whole bunch of these guys in action, although that might be an indictment right there that some of these guys haven't made it to the NHL. But when you look at Drury's first draft class, overall, it's not very good. That was the one that was headlined by Brian Hoffman. And as we mentioned just a second ago, he now heads back down to the AHL. Noah Laba, at least right now, is the best draft pick that Chris Drury has made because he was taken in the 4th round, 111 overall in that draft. He's just 22 years old. And again, this is somebody that's looking like he belongs here and that he's not going to head back to the AHL anytime soon, if ever. It certainly looks like the Rangers found a good one here. So that's obviously awesome. You have to have guys step up on a team that you feel is lacking depth in the first place. And very clearly, Noah Laba has done exactly that. So we're going to keep everything going here. In just a second, we are going to shift our attention to a phenomenally historical defensive performance by this New York Ranger team. Everybody had a hand in this. It's awesome to see. And it's a big reason, obviously, why the Rangers won this game and, why things are starting to look up recently. So we're going to talk about that in just a second. All right, we just want to take a minute to let everybody know that today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by Monarch. Let's be honest, most of us cannot even name all our financial accounts, let alone what they're worth. Between 401ks, savings, and investments, it is easy to lose track. And that can mean leaving money on the table. That's why there is Monarch, an all-in-one personal finance tool that brings your entire financial life together in one clean, easy-to-use interface on your laptop or on your phone. Monarch is the best because you can organize your accounts, track your spending, and get a better handle on your investments without ever having to touch a spreadsheet. Don't let financial opportunity slip through the cracks. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off of your first year. That's monarch.com, code LOCKEDONNHL for half off of your first year. And today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is also brought to you by Gametime. Hockey season is here, and nothing beats being in the arena for those opening games. But let's be real, getting tickets can be a total headache. Between waiting in queues, surprise fees, and prices that jump right before checkout, it is easy to get frustrated when all you want to do is cheer for your team. That's where Gametime comes in, the app that gives fans the advantage. It's your ultimate life hack for scoring amazing NHL tickets, fast, easy, and stress-free. Gametime is the best because it's got panoramic seat views. That is an awesome feature. Basically, you just click where you want to sit, and it'll show you exactly what you'll be looking at when you're there for your favorite team, your favorite band, your favorite event, whatever it might be. You know exactly what you're getting before you actually buy the tickets. And you can even find NHL tickets for under $25. Take the guesswork out of buying NHL tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. That's code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Swipe, tap, ticket, and go. All right, let's go ahead and wrap up today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers by talking a little bit about what was, by any measure, a historically dominant defensive performance by the New York Rangers. Everything we've talked about so far in today's episode is great. It helps the team. It's awesome. You've got overtime heroics. You've got different star players on this Ranger team beginning to find their groove a little bit. Noah Laba establishing himself as somebody that, may just stick with the New York Rangers for the long haul. All that stuff is awesome. But the biggest reason why the Rangers won this game was their team defense. The team defense that has been mostly elite so far this season. And last night was played at a historical level. The Rangers in this game outshot the Kraken 27-13. 27-13. They said on the broadcast that this is the third fewest amount of shots on goal that the Rangers have allowed in any game in franchise history. Third fewest in 100 years. And you would have to go back to 1981 to find a game where the Rangers obviously permitted fewer than 13 shots on goal. And I realize, they haven't always tracked shots on goal. And the farther you go back in history, the more kind of murky the stat keeping probably was and is. But regardless, either any way you slice it, that's a historically dominant defensive performance by the New York Rangers. So to begin with, that's just an awesome stat. That's a lot of fun. It's been cool to see the Rangers really commit to team defense this season and shut a lot of opponents down. But what I love more about this stat, about this performance than anything else, is that it means that everybody out there for the New York Rangers is doing his job, plain and simple. Everyone is committed to playing defensive hockey. Everyone is buying into Mike Sullivan's system. Everyone is giving you an honest effort out there. Everybody is emphasizing defense first. Because if that was not the case, if anybody out there was slacking, if anybody out there was just kind of trying to cherry pick and look for offensive chances and not back check and not fight for loose pucks, then there's no way you can, limit your opponent, obviously, to 13 shots on goal. If any line is taking it easy, that's just not going to happen. That's absolutely unreal. 13 shots on goal. Guys are out there. They're going to work. Forechecking, back checking, winning puck battles, dominating puck possession as it felt like the Rangers did in this game. Defending your own blue line infinitely better than you did at any point this previous season. Even zone exits, which has long been an Achilles heel for this Ranger team, even going back to the President's Trophy season, that starts to be looking a little bit better as well. These are all things that the Rangers have done well in the games that they've won this season. The games they haven't won, they've either gotten goalied or they've gotten away from this formula. I mean, that's pretty much it. You could pretty much look at any loss that the Rangers have had this season, and it's one of those two things or the other, or potentially both of them. But yeah, I mean, look, bottom line, if anybody's slacking defensively, you are not going to hold your opponent to 13 shots on goal. And the most ironic thing about all of this to me is that when you look at the Rangers, team defense, the weak link was technically Igor Shesterkin as far as like defensive hockey for the Rangers. Now, look, he only gave up 2 goals. He got the win, made a couple of saves, I think, in overtime. It's hard to remember. That overtime's just a blur at this point. But I mean, look, bottom line, the Rangers shut them down. The Kraken were credited with 0 high danger scoring chances. They were credited with 1 medium danger chance. They score on that one. And then 12 low danger chances, and they score on one of those as well. The expected goals for the Rangers in this game was 3.04 goals for the Rangers. Expected goals against, or expected goals for, when it comes to the Kraken, was 0.30. The Kraken in this game, based on everything that happened, and analytics are not perfect, but I think they do kind of tell you the story, quite often. And this comes to us from Clear Slate Analytics from Steve Valiquette. Again, 0.30 expected goals for the Kraken. 0.3 of a goal were expected for the Seattle Kraken in this game. So that's awesome for the Rangers and obviously their defensive effort. As for Igor, though, this is sort of a new challenge, and it's one that I don't think has really faced all that often. In fact, I know he hasn't faced all that often thus far in his NHL career, where he might not always have a lot of action. He might not always be under fire. Now, on the surface, this seems like a good thing. And in the long run, I certainly think that it will be a good thing. But again, when you've got a goalie who's used to being under fire and used to facing a high volume of shots night in and night out, and used to having to make a couple of high quality chances throughout the night to give his team a chance to win, and all of a sudden it switches to basically the exact opposite of that, where teams just aren't getting any shots on goal, and even when they do, I mean, they're very simple saves for Igor Shesterkin. In the short term, this could actually work against him a little bit, just because, again, he's used to being in the flow of the game. He's used to being in the weeds. If he's just standing there for minutes at a time and the puck's on the other side of the rink, I mean, again, he's just not really in his flow, right? And long term, I think this will be a good thing. Obviously, for the Rangers as a whole, also for Igor Shesterkin. Short term, though, I mean, you might have a couple of nights like this where he doesn't face a high, volume of shots or all that many difficult shots. Maybe there's a couple of times where, he either gets flat-footed or, again, just not in his flow, not feeling the rhythm of the game. That's at least possible. But again, a good problem to have for the short term for the New York Rangers. I know there's going to be some people, they hear all these defensive numbers and they hear all these, low amount of shots on goal for the Kraken. And they're going to point out, and they're not wrong, but they're going to point out that the Kraken are not exactly an offensive juggernaut. And that is true. The Kraken have just 30 goals in 11 games. It's not like microscopic, but less than 3 goals per game is obviously not that much. But the bottom line, look, the Kraken, even after this loss, 5-2-4, they're currently in 3rd place in their division. They're a playoff team. I mean, it's so early in the season, but if the season was to end right now, they would be a playoff team. So as far as people like looking at the quality of opponent, first of all, they're not that bad of a team. They do struggle offensively. I think that those numbers do spell that out. But the bottom line, the Rangers did what they're supposed to do against a team that struggles for offense, that struggles for goals. They did all that and more, holding any opponent in the NHL to an expected goal total of 0.30. That's to be celebrated, and it should not be downplayed. That was a phenomenal defensive effort by the New York Rangers in this game. And one more point I'll make here before we call it is that this is not a one-time thing for the Rangers. This has basically been the theme for the entire season. Couple of, exceptions to the rule, namely, I would say the game against the Sharks and certainly the game against the Flames. But this is who the Rangers have been so far this season. They have been a shutdown defensive team. Now, having mostly elite goaltending, that certainly helps as well. But you've got this stat from Top Down Hockey as of November 2nd. And they spell out that as of November 2nd, the Rangers have the best 5v5 expected goals against per 60 minutes at 2.16 goals per 60. So that's tremendously impressive. And, again, when it comes to metrics, I do have mixed feelings on them. I've mentioned this in the past. I do not want to see hockey become some kind of, hockey simulation or some kind of like computer simulation. But I do think these stats occasionally do have their place. And you don't have a hard time convincing me that the Rangers, lead the league in this stat, or that they're at least, near the top of it, because it does feel like a lot of nights, they're shutting opponents down. They're shutting some star players down. That's very impressive as well. They've twice shut down Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl, just to name a few. So, so far, so good. If the Rangers continue to play this brand of hockey where it's defense first and, you rely that the goals will eventually be there for you, I think this is repeatable. I think this is sustainable, and hopefully it continues right into Tuesday night's matchup against the Canes, because God knows this Ranger team needs to get a win at home at some point this season. Hopefully Tuesday's the night. But we'll call it there. If you guys would like to get in touch with this podcast, please send an email to lockedonnyrangers@gmail.com. Once again, that is lockedonnyrangers@gmail.com. Definitely give us a follow on Twitter as well, at JChick17. Once again, at JCHIK17. And definitely subscribe to Locked On New York Rangers YouTube channel. Thanks again, guys. I will see you next time.